chapter, Boston Food History. My name is Lily Weitzman, and I am a programming librarian here at the Newton Free Library. Before we start, I want to take a moment to thank New TV for recording today's program. And I'm so pleased to welcome Clara Silverstein for this evening's event, where she'll explore the history and present day of Boston food. Clara is a food historian, author, and experienced presenter with a passion for connecting the past to everyday eating. Her newest book is the second edition of the Boston Chef's Table, a collection of recipes from local chefs with a background on New England food history. She's also co-author of the New England Soup Factory Cookbook. A former food writer at the Boston Herald, she has also published articles in the Boston Globe, Runner's World, and the Oxford Encyclopedia of Food and Drink in America. With an MA in History from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, Clara has led programs at institutions such as the National Archives, the Library of Virginia, and the New England Historic Genealogical Society. Welcome,
Great.
Clara.
And thanks to the Newton Free Library for hosting me here. I'm going to be talking a lot about food history in Boston. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. And tonight, you're going to be hearing about foods that are native to New England, the origin of food traditions, including clam chowder, lobster rolls, baked beans. We all know what they are, but where did they come from? And something about Boston's oldest continually serving restaurant, how contemporary chefs are interpreting New England cuisine, so that gets into some of what's in the Boston Chef's Table, and then some additional highlights in the Boston Chef's Table. So I'm going to start with a question. What are some of the foods that are native to New England that you know about?
Cranberries.
Cranberries, definitely. Yep, I'll mention those. Clams, those are in New England waters, yes. Herring, yes. Herring. I'm not going to be talking specifically about that, but I am going to be talking about seafood. Apples, actually crab apples, yes, but other apples that we would call eating apples, those had to be imported. So the Roxbury russet, that came from a graft that came from England. So that's an example of an antique apple. So, but that's a great guess. Yep. There is a fruit. You find it in the fall. It smells amazing. They make grape juice out of it. Right, that was a dead giveaway, right. But there's one that nobody's guessed yet, and this was so important in the early days of America. And it is something that does not grow in Europe, but was basically a sustaining crop for the first settlers who came to the Plymouth colony and then the Massachusetts Bay colony. Okay.
Squash?
Pumpkin?
Squash, that was here. No, the one I'm thinking of is corn. Nobody guessed corn. And that was so important. So the native people knew how to cultivate corn. It's a native plant to the Americas. And they taught the English settlers who came to Plymouth in 1620 how to cultivate and use corn in their recipes. And they used it themselves. The native people used it themselves. There's a plaque on Cornhill Beach in Truro. Has anyone ever been there? What happened is the Mayflower stopped there first before it came to Plymouth. And it found some corn that the native people had buried, and they took it and used it to eat because they arrived in December. That wasn't their plan, but that's when they arrived. And so there's a plaque commemorating that. And that's a replica of the Mayflower. Now, the native people often planted corn with two other kinds of plants, the squash and beans. Those are called the three sisters, the corn, the squash, and the beans, because each crop complemented each other. The beans added nitrogen to the soil that helped nourish the other plants, and then the bean plants could help shade some of the squash when it was still growing so that it wouldn't get sun-scorched. So, complementary system. Succotash. Have people ever eaten that? Yeah, okay, that is what we think of as a typical New England food, and the native people were the ones who thought to put the corn together with beans, and now it might contain other vegetables. There's red pepper in this version. I've seen it with carrots and zucchini, edamame beans. That's not a traditional New England dish anymore, but the succotash idea definitely is. And then this is something that was eaten a lot in the colonies, the cornbread, lots of variations of cornbread, and then cornmeal mush, which sounds awful, but it's really pretty good. I made some once. I love to make early American recipes, and so I made some out of a cookbook, and you basically just mix the cornmeal with a little bit of milk and heat it up, and it's pretty tasty. It's a little bit like a porridge or cream of wheat or something like that. That's its texture, but it's pretty good. There you see it with some blueberries, also native to New England, and it could be butter or maple syrup. So squash, somebody did guess about squash, and those are several different varieties that grow here. And one of the things that people made early on, this comes from a cookbook from 1796, and they didn't call it pumpkin, they called it pumpkin. That was just how they pronounced it back then, pumpkin pie. And this was the very first cookbook to be published in America in 1796 in Hartford. And so my question when I saw that was, what did people do for their recipes before then? They were certainly cooking and eating, starting in 1620 when the English settlers came. And what it was an oral tradition. So people would show each other how to cook. And now we think of cooking as something that people learn how to do and they're very proud of their cooking. But back then it was more sustenance. It wasn't something that people were bragging about or look what I made, look at what I got for inspiration. It was basically survival. There just wasn't all that much food to come by, especially in the growing climate that we have. Cranberries, we all know about those. They get their name because the flower on them looks a little bit like a crane, a bird. And so craneberry was the original name, came from the Dutch, and it got shortened to cranberry. And we know they grow in southeastern Massachusetts. And they're also called bounce berries. Has anyone ever tried that? I did that with my kids. If you throw them on the floor, they do bounce. They're super tart, but they are often mixed with sugar to make them more palatable, or other fruits. This is a couple of different recipes, the cranberry sauce, and then there's a cranberry pie in progress that's going to get a top crust, but you can see there's some sugar and some nuts mixed in. And I want to just say a little bit about the sweeteners that you would have had in the colonies in early America. And we think of sugar, that's what we would use now. But any guesses what was a sweetener that the native people figured out how to make?
Maple syrup.
Maple syrup, absolutely. They were the ones who figured out how to tap the trees and pull out the sap and then boil it down. And so that was a sweetener you could find then. The white sugar that we use now, that was not very common. The sugarcane plants that comes from grow mostly in the Caribbean or in very hot places. Louisiana is one of the few places in the United States where sugarcane grows, but it wasn't being cultivated there back in colonial days. And so people would take molasses. That was the other really common sweetener. So if you've ever made Indian pudding or Marlboro pie or some of these really early American recipes, there's molasses as the sweetener. Now you knew we would be talking about seafood, and here we have lobsters. Now, interestingly, the early settlers didn't really think lobsters were so wonderful. They called them, in one case, and clams too, the meanest of God's blessings, and they fed them to their hogs. So this did not become popular until later. But now, of course, we have the lobster roll. And this is one from the Banks restaurant in the Back Bay, and this is a warm lobster roll. People realize there are two kinds, right? The warm lobster roll that will be served maybe with butter on a toasted bun. And then the cold one, which is more common, that's more commonly eaten on Cape Cod, that, and up in Maine, that's cold lobster meat. And it's served on the same kind of bun, the top-loaded bun, but it often just has a piece of lettuce underneath, a little bit of mayonnaise. And then you can get into debates about which one is better and what else you can mix with the lobster roll, but it's a pretty pure product. It's not supposed to have a lot of different things with it. So, just show of hands, who likes cold lobster rolls? How about warm ones? I'm a warm person. I'm in the minority, right. But the Banks is one that is my ideal of a lobster roll. It's chock full of meat. It's so filling, you can barely even finish it. It's really good. Clams. So this you can find in New England waters. And clam chowder, interestingly enough, did not really become popular until the 1800s. There were chowders before then, but they were made from fish. The clam chowders came along later as people developed more of a taste for clams. And I have here a recipe that was published in the Boston Evening Post. This is 1751, so a little bit before the clam chowder became really popular. But this is a recipe in verse. Actually, it's for fish chowder, so it's not for clam chowder yet. First, lay some onions to keep pork from burning. That refers to, if you've seen a recipe for chowder, has salt pork in it. That's how you start it. That's very traditional. You render or saute the pork to pull out the fat, and then you add the other ingredients. First, lay some onions to keep pork from burning, because in chowder, there can be no turning. Then lay some pork slices very thin. Thus you in chowder must always begin. And then you add the fish and so on after that. And corn chowder, that's a very New England thing. There's some regional variations of chowder. I did not include the one from Manhattan because most New Englanders really don't like it. New Englanders want the one that's white as a snowdrift. But there's a variation in Rhode Island that is clear chowder. I haven't seen it, but I know that's something. It's often made with quahogs, which are more plentiful down there. But Manhattan clam chowder has tomatoes added, and it started in Connecticut, and then it moved south. And here is what a cookbook author named Eleanor Early said about it in the 1940s. She called the Manhattan version a terrible pink mixture and said tomatoes and clams have no more affinity than ice cream and horseradish. So, kind of interesting what people think. People have very strong opinions about regional food. Now, speaking of regional food, can anyone guess the oldest restaurant that's continually serving in the Boston area? Yes, I see a hand. Yes, continually serving. There are old restaurants, but that one has been serving since 1826. And the image on the bottom is what it used to look like. And I love the fact that the harbor's right there and you can see the sailboat in the background. It's a painting, so I don't know how accurate that really was in terms of distance, but I really like that image. But that's what it looks like today. I took that picture a couple years ago. And the oyster bar where Daniel Webster ate is still downstairs. You can go and sit at it. People were smaller back then. It feels really crowded if you sit in there. And then John F. Kennedy ate there too, and he had a booth upstairs. And the restaurant's now a National Historic Landmark. And there are a couple recipes that are in the Boston Chef's Table book. I'm sure you recognize them both. The one on the left, the baked beans, and the one on the right, the chowder. So this brings me to my next question, which is why Boston is called Beantown. Anyone have any guesses? Or maybe you know? Yes?
Begins with a B.
Oh, that's a good guess, but no. So it actually goes back to our Puritan heritage. The Puritans are who settled in Plymouth and also in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630, so 10 years after Plymouth was settled. And they could not cook on Sabbath. They took it really, really literally. And so they had to come up with a meal that they could prepare in advance, put in the oven, and then serve on their Sabbath, which was Sunday. So that's what they did with the baked beans. They took white beans, usually Great Northern beans or navy beans, and then they'd mix them with some salt pork. That was also popular because remember, there was no refrigeration, so salted meat is what kept well. And so they put that in the oven. Also molasses, remember I told you about molasses being the sweetener, that would go in there, and a little mustard, and it would go into the oven and come out in time after church the next day they could eat it. Molasses was a common trade good, as I mentioned. There's a not so great history about molasses, which was part of the triangle trade. So molasses is a product of sugar refining, but it's much easier to make than white sugar. And so that would be taken in, or made in the Caribbean. It's the first boiling of the cane, the sugar cane, and put into jugs or barrels, and then brought to New England. The New Englanders would make it into rum, which there were a lot of distilleries in the Boston area. I think there were close to 20 in the 1700s and 1800s. So that's what would happen. Then the rum would get shipped off to Africa. It would be traded for enslaved people. They would go to work in the Caribbean on the sugar plantations. Some would also come to the United States to work. That was called the triangle trade. So again, not a great history, but it's important to know about it. Here's something that's more fun to talk about, chocolate. Have people seen the Baker chocolate brand? Still exists. But this chocolate used to be made in Dorchester and at the Baker Chocolate Factory, which is on the Neponset River. It's now condos, but surprise. The factory closed. The brand is now owned by a multinational corporation. I forget which one, but it got, the Baker name is still there, but the factory closed in the 1960s. So this opened in Dorchester in 1765 to make chocolate. And some of the chocolate it made got put into hot chocolate drinks that were served during the tea boycott in the lead up to the American Revolution. People were very mad about having to pay tax on the tea that they imported, and they chose not to drink it. They also had the Boston Tea Party, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And so it was one way that this chocolate was in circulation in Boston. People used to call Lower Mills in Dorchester Chocolate Village because there were so many factories there. The factories really expanded. Oh, I have it here. Kraft Heinz is now making Baker's products. And in the cookbook, I couldn't resist putting in a couple of old recipes. There's something called Milton pudding, which is named after the town of Milton. And there's also a fudge that was made with Baker's chocolate. So it's kind of fun. Baker Chocolate used to put out pamphlets telling people how to cook with their product, which we still see today. There are recipes on the side of the boxes and so on. So I want to talk now a little bit more about what chefs are doing with some of these traditional ingredients now. But I'll pause and just see if you have any questions about the history that I've kind of gone over. Yes?
So where does the word succotash come from?
I think that's a native word. I'm not positive, but it sounds like it's a native word, not positive. Yeah, that's something I'll check. Okay. All right. So this is getting more into some of the recipes that you'll find in the Boston Chef's Table. One of the themes of the book is how current chefs in Boston use New England ingredients in contemporary ways. And here is an oyster recipe at Yvonne's. This used to be the Lockover, and it was a very fancy restaurant that did not allow women to eat there until the 1970s. But now look at it. This is the renovation. It's a supper club. And what they make, there was a classic lobster Savannah, and this is an oysters Savannah variation of that. So that's kind of fun. Here is something from 75 Chestnut, which also owns, the same owners also own the Cheers Bar, which is a big tourist attraction. And, but this is more of their real neighborhood restaurant. Cheers is the fake neighborhood restaurant where everyone knows your name, but this one is real. And so there's a main stone crab topping on a carrot soup. So that's an interesting interpretation. Here at Estella, which is in downtown Crossing, infamous because that's where those Patriots players partied after they won their game, and they partied after hours. But they have some really good food there. And this salad is made by a chef originally from Haiti, but he took some pears, which are a traditional New England ingredient, and roasted them and then put them in a salad with arugula and walnuts and also goat cheese. So that's an interesting interpretation. And this is Malala's Bowl, which is from the Dudley Cafe in Roxbury. And they wanted to name their dishes after different women from history. And this is named after Malala Yousafzai. She was an activist for girls' education in Pakistan. And all the names of the rice bowls honor people. And this has a lot of vegetables that we would still find in New England mixed into this dish. I see some peppers and some greens, and rice is not native, but there are some squash in there tucked in on the side. So a lot of different vegetables. Now, lobster mac and cheese from Legal Seafoods. That's way more traditional, but it is interesting that they've chosen to add lobster to good old mac and cheese. And Legal Seafoods was very nice about contributing recipes to the book. Their fish chowder, not clam chowder, was so famous that it was served at the inauguration of one of the US presidents. I think it was the first George Bush. Does anyone know exactly? I'm pretty sure that's who it was, but I found that was interesting that somebody reached out and chose that chowder as a good example of American food. This is an interesting interpretation. I showed you those early cornbread recipes. There's a barbecue restaurant in Boston called the Smoke Shop, and I said, well, it's going to be probably a little hard for people to make barbecue at home, so do you have something else that you could give me that would be good for the book? Because in the book I wanted things that people could actually make at home. And he said, oh, well, our #1 side dish is this cornbread. And he said, it's northern style, it's not southern. And he tops it with a honey sea salt butter. So that's an interesting way to have it. There probably was honey back in colonial times, but I'm not sure if people really knew how to safely extract it from the honeycombs. And then here's another interesting interpretation of cornmeal. This is from Flour Bakery. It's only in Boston and Cambridge, but if you ever have a chance, please go. It's a wonderful place. And here the chef, Joanne Chang, is mixing cornmeal with lime. And so that's an updated version of something to do with cornmeal. So just a few other things that have to do with food history that you'll find in the book that are also fun to talk about. One of them is the Boston Public Market. This took years and years to get off the ground, but it opened in 2015, and they give preference to Massachusetts products. They also have some New England products, but you can buy these ingredients in there. So that would be the squash and the parsnips and sunchokes. Those are all native to New England. Or you can also buy prepared food in there. So you can buy smoothies and coffee and pizza and so on. I'm not sure that those ingredients are native to New England, but the companies are in New England. There's also beer, same thing. Hops don't really grow in New England, but the companies that make the beer are from New England. There's also some seafood that you see. And this is our own Julia Child. She lived in Cambridge for years, and she started at WGBH. She started by doing a demonstration on air of whisking some eggs in a copper pot. And she was publicizing the book she wrote, Mastering the Art of French Cooking. And they got so much mail at WGBH about how much they liked her. They said, please bring her back so she can give another demonstration. And that's really how the French Chef, her cooking show, started. She didn't set out to be a TV chef. It didn't exist yet. So she was one of the first, and she filmed everything at WGBH. And interestingly, when I was researching the book, I went to her archives at the Schlesinger Library at Harvard. And you would think that she's very off the cuff, but she really wasn't. She had a diagram of her set, and she also had a script written out, and she would cross out things and add other things. So she was very intentional about what she was doing. And I thought it was really funny that she would say what was in each drawer on the set, and she would have 2 clean aprons in case she'd made a big mess on one of them. Glasses, she underlined and wrote extra pair, so she needed her reading glasses. She also had gum and cigarettes. I guess one canceled out the other. I never saw her smoking on set, but I guess she went off and had a cigarette break, as many chefs often do. A couple other things to mention about her. Some of the chefs that got their start in Boston really appreciated her. She would drop by their restaurants, sometimes unannounced, and she would give helpful advice. They were really scared sometimes when she came in, but she was very kind, and chefs really enjoyed her. The other thing I'll mention doesn't have to do with her, but has to do with another chef, Joyce Chen, who ran a restaurant in Cambridge for years and years. Joyce Chen's, it was called. She had a product line, and she also had a cooking show where she was teaching Westerners how to make Chinese food. She never got the traction, but she was an early chef on TV also. And so also in the book, you're going to find that I went into different neighborhoods. The person there is someone who led me on a tour through Roxbury and through Jamaica Plain, showing me some of the restaurants in these neighborhoods. The other photo, it would be on your right, is from apparently, I didn't know this, there's a part of Jamaica Plain called Boston's Latin Quarter, and it refers to a lot of Puerto Ricans settled there in the 1960s, and a lot of the stores there are still Spanish speaking. There are Spanish speakers from many other parts of the world now, but you can see some of the signs there are still in Spanish. So that's also something to know and recognize about Boston, is that a lot of different people came from all over the world to contribute to our cuisine. And then I couldn't end this without giving a nod to Cheers. So that is now a recreated bar from the TV show. I really don't know how much longer it will last, because the show is pretty old by now, and even the reruns are pretty old. It's kind of dated, but you can still go in there and see that's a cardboard cutout of one of the characters from the show. But there's a new restaurant that is an example of life imitating TV. It is based on Friends, and there's a place where they went for coffee. The name is escaping me right now, but it's Central Perk. Yes, it's on Newbury Street, yeah. So if you want to go to something that's inspired by a TV show, that one is definitely there too, and it opened more recently. So with that, I'm going to say thank you and see if you have questions. Yes?
My question is about cheesecake. You didn't cover that. What's the history of cheesecake?
So cheesecake, I'll tell you, that is not necessarily a New England thing, but dairy products, this really surprised me when I thought about it. Cows and horses are not native to the Americas. So when the people came to settle in this part of the world, they brought their farm animals on the boats with them. Can you imagine being a cow or a horse on a journey? But that's how dairy products got to this part of the world. So the English people and also the Spaniards who settled in South America, they were the ones who brought the horses. I'm not so sure if the the milk and the cows were a huge part of their diet, but they definitely brought horses. And the English definitely brought their cows. They brought pigs too. So kind of interesting. The native people called, when they first saw horses, they didn't know what they were. They called them dogs with big heads. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah. I see a question there and then there.
I noticed when you were talking about the baked beans, sorry, there was a crock that was showing, and I feel like that's sort of a traditional baked bean crock, and I'm just wondering if you knew where that came from and if the colonists used that when they were originally making those baked beans for something.
Right. No, that's a very traditional New England pot for baking the beans, because you wanted something that would offer kind of even and slow heat, so it was like a casserole, and you could put the top on it too. They would sometimes bake the beans in anything they had. If they didn't have a bean pot, they could bake them in a pie tin or something else. But that is a traditional vessel. It's usually ceramic, so that it can withstand the heat. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know exactly when they were made, though. Yes, the man in green, and then, yeah.
Is there any liquor that is unique to Massachusetts or Boston that the settlers put together and made? And I mean, there's, for example, bourbon down in
Right, that, I think rum. That
rum is a big thing.
rum was distilled a lot in Boston. It wasn't created here, of course, but there were a lot of distilleries. So that would be something. The Sam Adams beer you see, that is, well, it's more modern, but there was a brewery. There were a lot of breweries in Boston too. There was the Haffenreffer Brewery, and I think they're in that old building in Jamaica Plain. So the man who does the tours of Roxbury and Jamaica Plain also does a beer tour and talks about some of that history. But I don't think there was anything invented in Boston in terms of alcohol. The Puritans didn't like alcohol either, so that probably didn't help. Yes, you had a question.
Some of us in
Oh, hold on. There's someone here, and then she'll come to you next. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about marshmallow fluff?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I have a bag that is from the Fluff Festival. My daughter got it for me. Fluff was invented in, I'm going to see if I have this straight. It was, I think, either Somerville or Medford. I think it was Somerville, because the Fluff Fest is now in Somerville, and it's a marshmallow cream. So a marshmallow actually comes from a plant that grows in a marsh, but marshmallow flavor is made with corn syrup and all kinds of other things, so it's not made from a plant. And I'm trying to remember when they started marketing it and when it took off. But I do know that the Fluffernutter sandwich is now part of an official Massachusetts sandwich, I believe. And it's peanut butter with fluff. So it's definitely not only was popular then, but it's still really popular, and that's part of it. So yeah, I don't know the rest of the history off the top of my head, but it's pretty easy to find, and it's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Many of us in Newton are very familiar with wild turkeys. Are any of the contemporary chefs making new and interesting ways to use turkey as a gourmet item?
Well, that's an interesting question, because when I was putting together the Boston Chefs book, I would call up the chefs and say, here's what I'm doing. what would you like to send me? And they all wanted to send me seafood entrees. So that is what they like to do most. But around Thanksgiving, you will see some interesting turkey dishes. And one thing I've seen some of the chefs do is they'll make a roulade. So they'll take a flat piece of turkey meat. So this would be without the bone. And then they'll put a stuffing in it, roll it up, and bake that. There's also this weird thing called the turducken hen, which I don't think is so popular anymore.
I don't
But
think that's New England, I think that's a southern.
that, I think so. But that's, I would say the chefs aren't doing that. That's kind of it seems like a TikTok trend, even though it got out there before TikTok ever existed. But you're basically putting the turkey, and then you put in a duck, and then I think you put in a chicken, and you bake that all together. It's pretty bizarre. But yeah, I would say, that's one I can think of off the top of my head that is kind of an interesting turkey preparation. And you'll see more at Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Are there any originating desserts from the Boston area or New England besides Boston cream pie? Or
Boston cream pie, that's what I was going to say, and there is a recipe for that in the book. There is one called Marlborough pie, and I can't remember exactly what's in it. I think there's molasses as the sweetener, but I'm trying to remember what the other flavors are. That's one. I don't think apple pie is original to New England. People made it. Or squash pie, maybe parsnip pie. That seems like a New England thing. I feel like I've seen that in some Maine cookbooks. And I don't see it at all anymore. But they would take the parsnips and add sweetener and put them in a pie crust. So that is something I've seen.
Rhubarb?
Rhubarb, yes, people definitely make rhubarb pie. That's not specific to New England, but they do. It's often paired with strawberries, strawberry rhubarb pie. But yes, there's definitely rhubarb pie. Yeah. Couple questions here. Yeah.
Can you talk about the fig Newton?
Oh yes, the fig Newton. So that is named after the city of Newton, and it was invented at a cookie factory in Cambridge called the Kennedy Biscuit Company. And that got taken over by Nabisco. And so I don't have the timing in my head exactly when the fig Newton was invented. I want to say towards the end of the 19th century. And there were other cookies named after other parts of Massachusetts. There was, I believe, a Needham something and a Shrewsbury something, but they didn't last. The fig Newtons are still around. And there was, in the 1990s, when Mayor Mann was mayor of Newton, there was the 100th anniversary of the fig Newton. So actually, that's giving us our date, right? So if it was in the 1990s, it was the 100th anniversary, then it would have been invented in the 1890s. And so there was a big fig Newton festival, and there was a fig costume, like somebody dressed up like a mascot dancing around with the mayor. It was really quite something. So that has a fun history, right? And you had a question too? Oh, about the fig Newtons. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I should have mentioned that as when I'm talking in Newton.
How did the settlers in the 17th century get vitamin C? And what other kind of diseases from food insufficiency are you familiar with that afflicted them?
That's a good question. There was vitamin C in Concord grapes and in cranberries. They would not have really had access to citrus fruits. I know the sailors on the ships really would get scurvy and rickets from not having vitamin C. And they were able to get it. There was some port where they stopped and they would get limes. And so the British sailors were called limeys as a nickname because they had to eat it to keep from getting that. If anything, I would say that they did not in the winter have much access to fruits and vegetables but they would make use of their root cellars. So they would grow in the growing season things like carrots and parsnips. Don't think they really had tomatoes. They were not really popular until more of the 19th century. The greens, they would grow like different greens in their gardens and herbs, but they would have to preserve all those. So I think if anything, they maybe would lack from some of the nutrients you'd find in greens, and they had plenty of grain from the corn, but some of the greens, I don't know of any specific diseases they got from not having the right nutrients, but not having enough nutrition, that was a constant concern. Yeah. Okay, yes?
Did you find any mention of venison in your gathering?
Well, so there are restaurants that do make venison, but they didn't give me a recipe. I do have a duck recipe in there, and it's with a really delicious cherry sauce, and so that would also go really well with venison. But we do know venison, there isn't much we know about the first Thanksgiving. A lot of it is myths. There's only one person who made a written record of it, and he did it many years after it happened. So, but he did talk about venison there. He did talk about people eating venison at the first Thanksgiving. So, yeah. Okay. Well, I have copies of my book, and I'll stay around and answer more questions if they come up to you. And I want to thank you for being a great audience and having so many wonderful questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And before we break, I'm just going to read a quick closing. So thank you, Clara, once again for this. Sure. This is wonderful. And thank you all for joining us. It'd be wonderful to see folks at future programs at the library. We have tons of QR codes to our calendar and newsletter at the back of the room. And I'll highlight a couple of related programs that we have coming up. On May 14th, we'll be holding a screening of The Grocery List Show, which is a series of documentary shorts from Independent Lens that all profile community grocery stores. And if you want more local history, on June 2nd, we'll be hosting Historic Newton for a portrait of what life was like in Newton 250 years ago for a wide variety of people. Last little bits, we also always love to hear feedback about our programs. We have both paper and a QR code linked to a digital program feedback form. It's like 3 questions, it's very short. We always love hearing feedback. And that is it. Thank you all once again for joining us, and thank you.